John woke up to the familiar feeling of wetness beneath him. His heart sank even before his eyes fully opened. Not again. Please, not again. He lay still for a moment, hoping against hope that maybe it was just sweat, maybe the heat of Lagos had made him perspire heavily during the night. But he knew better. He had woken up like this almost every morning for the past 6 months since arriving in Lagos. The shame was instant, automatic, a heavy stone that settled in his chest before he even moved. Carefully, quietly, he peeled back the thin bed sheet and confirmed what he already knew. The mattress beneath him was soaked. Again, he looked at the small alarm clock on the floor beside his mat, 5:30. His brother's wife, Sister Joy, would be awake soon to start preparing for the day. He had maybe 15 minutes before she discovered what had happened. 12-year-old John moved quickly. He stripped the wet sheets and tried to wipe the mattress with a dry corner of the fabric, knowing it was futile. The smell would give it away. The dampness would give it away. Everything always gave it away. He heard footsteps approaching the room and his stomach clenched. Too late. The door opened and Sister Joy stood there, arms crossed, her face already set in the expression John had come to dread, a mixture of disgust and anger that made him feel smaller than he already was. "John, what is this?" she asked, though they both knew the question was rhetorical. She knew exactly what it was. "Sorry, sister," John whispered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Sorry? Sorry? Every single day it is sorry. Are you a baby? You are 12 years old and you are urinating on the bed like a 2-year-old. What is wrong with you?" John said nothing. What could he say? He had no answer. He had no explanation. He had tried everything he could think of to stop, but his body betrayed him every single night. Sister Joy stepped closer, her voice rising. "Get up. Now, you will mop the entire house before you go to school. Every single room, the parlor, the bedrooms, the corridor, the kitchen, everywhere. And if I see even one spot that is not clean, you will do it again." John nodded, tears already forming in his eyes. Though he tried desperately to hold them back, crying would only make things worse. As he moved to gather the wet bedding, Sister Joy added one more thing, her voice dripping with contempt. "And after school, we are taking you for deliverance. This thing you are doing, it is not normal. It is spiritual. You are going to see the pastor and he will cast out whatever demon is making you do this." John felt the tears spill over then, hot and shameful, sliding down his cheeks as he bundled up the wet sheets and carried them outside to wash before beginning his punishment of mopping the entire house. This was John's life in Lagos. This was his morning routine. This was his prison. But it hadn't always been this way. John never knew his father. Mr. Ikechukwu died when John was just 3 months old, leaving behind 3 wives and multiple children. John's mother, Mama John, was the third and youngest wife. She had given birth to 4 children, 3 girls, and finally, John, the only son. In the hierarchy of a polygamous household, the third wife is often at the bottom, and when the husband dies, that position becomes even more precarious. The property, the inheritance, the resources, these things went to the senior wives and their children. Mama John was left with almost nothing except her 4 children and her determination to raise them. Life in the village was hard. Mama John farmed cassava on a small plot of land, sold vegetables in the local market, and did whatever work she could find to feed her children. They lived in a small mud house with a thatched roof that leaked during the rainy season. They had no mattress, just woven raffia mats spread on the floor where they all slept together. Money was so scarce that some days they ate just one meal. School fees were a constant struggle. Uniforms were handed down and patched so many times that the original fabric was barely visible. But Mama John was determined that her children would go to school. Education, she often told them, was the only inheritance she could give them. John was a brilliant child. Even in primary school, he stood out. While other children struggled with reading and arithmetic, John absorbed everything like a sponge. He came first in his class in primary 1, first again in primary 2. In primary 3, he came second, but only because he was sick during the exams. In primary 4, he was back to first position. His teachers loved him. He was respectful, hardworking, eager to learn. They made him office boy. The student trusted with the key to the principal's office. Later, he became assistant head boy, and in primary 6, he was made head boy. John, barely 12 years old, stood in assembly every morning leading his schoolmates in prayer and announcements, a position of honor and respect. But John had a secret that filled him with shame even though he was just a child and it wasn't his fault. Every single night, John wet the bed. Not occasionally, not once in a while. Every night, without fail. In the village, Mama John managed it as best she could. She would wake John up twice during the night, once around midnight and again around 3 a.m., and walk him outside to urinate in the bushes behind their house. On nights when she remembered and woke him on time, the mat stayed dry. On nights when she was too exhausted from a day of farming and forgot to wake him, he would wet the mat. But in the village, this wasn't the catastrophe it would later become in Lagos. They had no mattress to ruin, just a raffia mat that could be rolled up and dried in the sun. The house was theirs, small and humble as it was, so there was no landlord to complain, no neighbors judging, no public humiliation. Mama John never beat John for it, never shouted at him, never made him feel like he was bad or cursed or possessed. She understood in her motherly wisdom that this was something beyond the boy's control. She had raised 3 daughters who never had this problem, so she knew John wasn't wetting the bed out of laziness or wickedness. It was just something his body did, something he would hopefully outgrow. John knew it bothered his mother though. He saw how tired she was, how she struggled to wake herself up twice a night to wake him. He saw her washing the mats over and over, spreading them in the sun, bringing them back in. He heard her prayers sometimes, asking God to help her son, to heal whatever was causing this. John prayed too. At night, before sleeping, he would pray, God, please don't let me wet the bed tonight. Please help me wake up when I need to urinate. Please make me normal like other children. But morning after morning, he woke up wet. And morning after morning, he felt like God wasn't listening. Despite the bedwetting, John's childhood in the village had moments of joy. He played football with his friends after school. He helped his mother on the farm. He read every book he could find, borrowed from teachers or older students. He was a child who smiled often, who was respected by his peers, who had a future that seemed bright despite the poverty. And then, everything changed. When John finished primary 6 and passed his first school leaving certificate examination with distinction, his eldest brother, Chukwudi, who lived in Lagos, decided it was time for John to leave the village. John needed to attend a better secondary school, Chukwudi said, and opportunities in the village were limited. The plan was that John would live with his half-brother Joe in Lagos. Joe was John's half-brother from his father's first wife. He was married to a woman named Joy, but they had no children yet. They had a 2-bedroom flat in Agege, a densely populated, chaotic part of Lagos where buildings were squeezed together like sardines and the air was thick with the smell of cooking, exhaust fumes, and open gutters. At 11 years old, John left the only home he had ever known. He left his mother, his sisters, the village, the familiarity. He boarded a bus with Chukwudi and traveled for hours on bumpy roads until they arrived in Lagos, loud, overwhelming, enormous Lagos where everything moved too fast and the sun felt different and nothing smelled like home. Brother Joe and Sister Joy welcomed him. They had a small room prepared for him, just a space in the corridor with a thin mattress on the floor, but it was his space. John was grateful. He had left the village mat behind and now he had an actual mattress. He thought this meant things were getting better. He didn't know then that this mattress would become the site of his greatest shame. The bedwetting didn't stop just because John changed locations. If anything, it got worse. In the village, Mama John woke him up at night. Here in Lagos, no one woke him up. Sister Joy was not his mother. She had no intention of waking up twice in the night to take care of a boy who should have been old enough to control his own body. The first morning, John woke up wet in Lagos. He panicked. He tried to hide the evidence, turning the mattress over, covering it with the bed sheets, hoping no one would notice. But of course, Sister Joy noticed. The smell gave it away. She didn't shout that first time. She just looked at him with surprise and disappointment and said, "John, did you wet the bed?" John, mortified, nodded. "You are 11 years old. This thing you are doing, you have to stop it. It is not good. Do you understand?" "Yes, sister," John whispered. She made him wash the sheets himself and spread the mattress outside to dry. John thought that would be the end of it. He prayed desperately that night that it wouldn't happen again, but it did, and again, and again. By the second week, Sister Joy's patience had evaporated. The punishments began. Every morning that John woke up wet, he was made to mop the entire flat before going to school. Not just his sleeping area, the entire flat. Every room, every corridor, every corner. With a bucket of water and a floor rag, 12-year-old John would be on his knees at 5:30 inches the morning, scrubbing floors while his brother and sister-in-law got ready for their day. Some mornings, the mopping took so long that John arrived at school late. His new secondary school had strict rules about punctuality. Late students were punished, made to kneel in the sun, or given extra manual labor, or caned. So John would finish being punished at home for bedwetting, rush to school, and get punished again for lateness. His teachers didn't know why he was always late. He was too ashamed to tell them. They thought he was lazy, undisciplined, irresponsible. This boy who had been head boy in primary school, who had been respected and admired, was now seen as a troublemaker in secondary school. The shame was crushing. The worst part was the public humiliation Sister Joy inflicted on him. One morning, after John had wet the bed yet again, Sister Joy did something that would scar him for years. She called the neighborhood children to come and see. Come and see this big boy who still wets the bed like a baby," she announced loudly enough for the entire compound to hear. Children from the surrounding flats came running, giggling, curious. They crowded around the doorway and looked at John standing there beside his wet mattress, his head bowed in shame. "Look at him," Sister Joy continued. 12 years old and still urinating on the bed. Is he not too old for this? Is he a baby?" The children laughed. They pointed. They whispered to each other. Some of them were younger than John. Some were his age mates. All of them now knew his secret. John wanted the ground to open and swallow him. He stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to cry, unable to do anything except exist in that moment of complete humiliation while children laughed at him. From that day forward, the neighborhood children had a new name for him: Bedwetter, Peace for Body, Baby John. They would call out to him when they saw him, "Yee, Bedwetter, did you piss yourself again today?" John stopped playing with other children, stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary. He became withdrawn, quiet, invisible. The bright, confident head boy from the village was disappearing, replaced by a timid, frightened shadow of a child who just wanted to be left alone. At school, thankfully, no one knew. John guarded that secret fiercely. He never invited anyone home, never went to anyone else's house, never participated in social activities. He went to school, attended classes, came straight home, and tried to be as invisible as possible. His academic performance, miraculously, remained strong. Despite everything, despite the shame and the sleep deprivation and the constant anxiety, John still came first or second in his class. His brain, at least, still worked. It was his body that betrayed him. Sister Joy's accusations became increasingly spiritual. She was a religious woman who attended a Pentecostal church where spiritual warfare was emphasized, where every problem was blamed on demons or witchcraft or ancestral curses. "This thing you are doing, it is not natural," she told John one evening. "A normal child does not wet the bed at your age. You are under a curse, or you are a wizard." John stared at her, not understanding. A wizard? What did that even mean? "Yes, a wizard," Sister Joy said, her voice serious. "You go for meetings at night, spiritual meetings. That is why you cannot wake up to urinate. Your spirit is busy somewhere else, doing evil things. and your body is just lying here like a dead thing. That is why you wet yourself. John wanted to protest. He wanted to say he didn't go anywhere at night, that he wasn't evil, that he was just a child who couldn't control his bladder. But Sister Joy had made up her mind. She began taking John to different churches for deliverance. The first was a small prayer house in Ikeja where a pastor known for casting out demons held all-night vigils. The pastor, a thin man with wild eyes and a loud voice, laid hands on John's head and began to pray violently. You spirit of bedwetting, come out, you marine spirit, you evil spirit from the mother's lineage. Come out in the name of Jesus, he shouted, shaking John's head with each declaration. John, terrified and confused, stood there while the pastor screamed prayers over him, pouring spits all over his body in the process, while other congregants joined in shouting amen and binding and casting. The session went on for hours. John was exhausted, humiliated, and completely bewildered. When it was over, the pastor declared him delivered. The problem is solved, he announced. The boy will not wet the bed again. The demon has been cast out. That night, John wet the bed again. Sister Joy was furious. She accused him of not having enough faith, of secretly wanting to remain cursed, of being in league with the devil. She took him to another church, and another, and another. Each deliverance session was more intense than the last. One pastor made him drink anointing oil. Another made him lie face down for hours while prayers were said over him. Another gave him a special soap to bathe with at midnight while reciting Bible verses. Nothing worked because there was no demon to cast out. There was just a child with a developing body that hadn't yet learned to wake itself up when the bladder was full. But no one saw it that way. To Sister Joy, to the pastors, to the neighbors who heard about the deliverance sessions, John wasn't a child with a medical condition. He was a spiritual problem that needed a spiritual solution. The accusation of being a wizard hurt John more than the physical punishments. It made him question himself. Am I evil? Is there something wrong with me on the inside? Is that why God won't help me? Is it possible to be a wizard and not know it? He questioned himself. He prayed more fervently than ever. Not just quick bedtime prayers, but long, desperate pleas. God, if there is a demon in me, please remove it. If I am cursed, please break the curse. If I have done something wrong, please forgive me. I just want to be normal. I just want to stop wetting the bed. Please, God, please. But morning after morning, he still woke up wet. John tried everything he could think of to solve the problem himself. He read in an old biology textbook at school that the bladder was a muscle and that muscles could be trained. So he tried to train his bladder during the day, holding his urine for as long as possible, trying to expand its capacity. It didn't work. If anything, it just made him uncomfortable during school hours. He tried drinking less water in the evening. He would stop drinking anything after 5 p.m., thinking that if his bladder had less liquid, maybe he wouldn't wet the bed. But then he would wake up incredibly thirsty in the middle of the night, and even without drinking much, he still wet the bed. One night, in a moment of desperate creativity born from pure desperation, John tried something that still makes him cringe when he thinks about it as an adult. He took a small nylon bag, the kind used for packaging pure water, and he tied it tightly around his penis before going to sleep. The logic in his 12-year-old mind was simple. If the urine couldn't come out, maybe he would wake up from the discomfort instead of just releasing it in his sleep. It was a terrible idea. He woke up in the middle of the night in excruciating pain. The nylon had cut into his skin. His bladder was full to bursting. He was wet anyway because the nylon had leaked, and now he was also in physical pain. He removed the nylon, used the bathroom, and lay back down crying quietly. He had run out of ideas. He didn't know what else to try. Brother Joe, for his part, was mostly absent from the situation. He worked long hours as an Okada rider and was rarely home. When he was home, he mostly stayed quiet while his wife handled the household matters. Once or twice, he told Sister Joy to take it easy on the boy, that he was still young, but Sister Joy would snap back that it was easy for him to say because he wasn't the one dealing with the daily washing and cleaning and shame. John sometimes wondered if things would have been different if his mother were there. Mama John would have woken him up at night. She would have been patient with him. She would have protected him from the neighborhood children and the deliverance pastors. But Mama John was in the village, struggling to feed his sisters and herself, and John knew he couldn't complain to her about what was happening in Lagos. She had sent him to Lagos for a better education, for a better future. If he told her about the bedwetting drama, she would feel guilty, she would worry, and there was nothing she could do about it anyway. So John suffered in silence. His emotional state deteriorated. He became anxious all the time, dreading bedtime, dreading mornings, dreading being discovered by new people. He became withdrawn at school, avoiding friendships, avoiding any situation where someone might get close enough to discover his secrets. His sleep suffered too. He would sometimes lie awake for hours, afraid to fall asleep, thinking that if he stayed awake, he could control his bladder. But eventually, exhaustion would win and he would fall asleep and wake up wet. He developed what he would later recognize as depression, though at 12 years old he didn't have a name for it. He just knew that life felt heavy, that happiness felt like something that happened to other people, that he was trapped in a cycle of shame and punishment with no end in sight. There were days when John thought about running away. Maybe he could go back to the village. Maybe he could live on the streets. Maybe anything would be better than this daily humiliation. But he had nowhere to go. He was just a child. So he endured, and then, one morning, everything changed. John was 14 years old. He had been living in Lagos for over 2 years. 2 years of daily bedwetting, 2 years of punishments and shame and deliverance sessions that accomplished nothing. He went to bed that night with his usual prayer, though by now it had become more mechanical than hopeful. God, please help me not to wet the bed tonight. Somewhere in the middle of the night, John felt something he had never felt before while asleep. He felt the pressure in his bladder. And instead of just releasing unconsciously, something in his brain clicked and he woke up. He opened his eyes in the darkness, feeling the urgent need to urinate. He actually got up and walked to the bathroom. He urinated. He went back to his mat. He went back to sleep. In the morning, John woke up to a sensation he had almost forgotten: dryness. The mattress beneath him was completely dry. He sat up, touching the mat, checking again and again to make sure he wasn't imagining it. He was dry. He had woken up on his own. He had gone to the bathroom. He had not wet the bed. John didn't celebrate. He didn't dare to hope. He thought maybe it was just one lucky night, a fluke, and tomorrow he would be back to the familiar wetness and shame. But the next night, the same thing happened. He woke up feeling the urge to urinate, went to the bathroom, and came back to a dry bed. And the next night, and the next. After a week of dry mornings, John started to believe it might be real. After 2 weeks, he was certain something had shifted in his body. His brain had finally learned to wake him up when his bladder was full. The bedwetting, which had dominated and ruined his life for years, had simply stopped. No dramatic deliverance session caused it. No special prayer, no medicine, no intervention. It just stopped. His body, in its own time, had matured enough to control the process. Sister Joy was suspicious at first. She thought maybe John was waking up super early to change the sheets before she could see them. But after a month of consistently dry mornings, even she had to accept that the problem had resolved itself. She never apologized for the years of humiliation, the public shamings, the accusations of witchcraft. She simply moved on as if it had never happened. The neighborhood children eventually found other things to gossip about and other people to mock. But John never forgot. John is an adult now, in his 30s, living a normal life with a good career and his own family. He no longer wets the bed, hasn't since that night when he was 14. But he still wakes up at least once every night to urinate, sometimes twice. His wife teases him gently about it, but she doesn't know the full story. He's never told her about the years in Lagos, about the shame, about being called a wizard. Doctors have told him he likely has a smaller bladder capacity than average, which explains both the childhood bedwetting and the continued need to wake at night to urinate. It's genetic, physiological, not spiritual. Nothing to do with demons or curses or evil spirits, just biology. But the psychological scars remain. Even now, decades later, John sometimes has dreams where he's a child again, waking up wet, hearing Sister Joy's voice calling the neighborhood children to come and laugh at him. He wakes up from these dreams with his heart racing, and it takes him a moment to remember that he's an adult now, that the bedwetting ended long ago, that he's safe. Looking back, John understands several things he couldn't comprehend as a child. First, childhood bedwetting, doctors call it nocturnal enuresis, is incredibly common. Studies show that about 15% of 5-year-olds, 5% of 10-year-olds, and even 1 to 2% of teenagers still experience it. John wasn't abnormal or possessed. He was one of millions of children whose bodies simply needed more time to develop nighttime bladder control. Second, punishment doesn't work. No child wets the bed intentionally, making John mop floors, publicly shaming him, accusing him of witchcraft. None of this helped. If anything, it made things worse by adding stress and anxiety, which can actually prolong bedwetting. Third, what John needed was medical support, not deliverance sessions. Simple interventions like bedwetting alarms, bladder training exercises, and in some cases, medication can help children overcome this faster. But in the Lagos compound where John lived, and in many Nigerian homes even today, bedwetting is seen as a spiritual issue, not a medical one. Fourth, the emotional damage from how bedwetting is handled can last far longer than the bedwetting itself. John's bedwetting stopped at 14, but the trauma of those years shaped his personality, his confidence, his sense of self. He became someone who was always watching himself, always afraid of being exposed, always waiting for the next humiliation. It took years of adulthood, years of therapy, years of success in his career and personal life for John to finally believe that he wasn't fundamentally flawed, that his childhood bedwetting didn't define him, that he was worthy of respect and love. John shares his story now not because he enjoys reliving those painful years, but because he knows there are children out there right now experiencing what he experienced. Children being punished for something they can't control, children being called witches and wizards, children being subjected to brutal deliverance sessions, children developing psychological trauma that will follow them into adulthood. He wants parents to know, if your child wets the bed, please don't punish them, don't shame them, don't accuse them of evil, take them to a doctor. Be patient with them, protect them from public humiliation, wake them up at night to use the bathroom if needed, use waterproof mattress covers, make them feel safe and supported, not ashamed and broken. Most children outgrow bedwetting naturally by their teenage years, just like John did, but how you treat them during those years will affect them for the rest of their lives. And he wants to acknowledge his mother, Mama John, who even in poverty, even with limited education, somehow understood that her son needed compassion, not condemnation. She woke up twice every night for years to help him, never making him feel like a burden, never calling him a wizard. She saw him as a child who needed help, not a problem that needed to be fixed with violence. That's the kind of parent every child with bedwetting needs. John's story is one of resilience. Despite years of trauma, he survived, he thrived, he became successful, he built a life. Please subscribe for more true life stories on this channel.